Okay, Jake, do you have a copy of your book nearby or the PDF I sent earlier? What I'd like you to do on that facing page 6061 is to read paragraphs 1, 2, 3, and 5. There's more there, but I think that would give us a sense. And then what I'd like to do is ask anyone who posts to the chat that they'd like to comment on that briefly, please do. It's a very interesting topic. So Jake, have it all. Go, do it. God.
So, yeah, thank you. So this is like an introduction to a section of poems, kind of like a statement about the process. It was one of those late weekend evenings when everybody in New York seemed drunk, probably was. I was at the Stone in the East Village listening to Chenier Blumenkranz Quartet. The place was full of people, dark, very quiet. Chenier, in the room's tentative center, deemed as the stage, was playing the oud, alone, bending deeply forward towards the score. He played slow, brief, and increasingly articulate phrases, which, intensified by our quiet, instead of disappearing, seemed to hang in the Stone's air. Chenier played and stared at the score as if hypnotized by it, or perhaps conversely, he was trying to hypnotize the notes on the sheet that shivered on the stand in front of him. Suddenly, a drunken voice hollered something incomprehensible right outside of the door, a jarring interruption of the silence and intensity surrounding the music. Chenier, without taking his eyes off the score, played a melodic phrase that closely mirrored the holler. It turned into a riff, one of many suspended in the air and sporadically reached for. As the improvisation continued to evolve, the anonymous East Village growl was appended to the paper the musician continued to hypnotize. I knew then that no music will move me as much as this kind. Creation may be a mystery, but when it comes to improvisation, you can touch it, taste the rawest thought. Nothing is outside the improviser's text. Heat, intoxication, plastic chairs, photographed and real faces, growls and hunks, all extend and expand the written score. This method of pointing to music's originary shape-shifting clout is perhaps what Amiri Baraka alluded to when he wrote, "Thought has a self. That self is music."
Nice, that's really great. Quick comments on what the concept is that Jake is trying to put his finger in, how and why he was moved by the idea that no music is more exciting than this kind. And to be specific and to repeat, this moment where someone playing from a score includes the sound of an interruption that comes into the room of the performance. So, Gabe, quick, what's your thought?
Sure, yeah. I mean, first of all, it sounds really exciting, and I look forward to the reading tonight that people should tune into. But also, it kind of reminds me of like a jazz version of the like Spicer's Poet as Radio, in the sense that I kind of think of it as like the world and the piece are not separate, and that they can, in fact, actually, that like some pretty good artists have the ability of letting them coalesce in moments and letting their accidents come together into some kind of shape. And so I think that it's a really nice kind of ars poetica, or a nice kind of statement of purpose or process. And I look forward to seeing what it leads into.
Thank you. And in the section that this leads into is called transcriptions. And in transcriptions, some of the poems are reprinted with, what do we call that?
QR code, Sal.
QR code, that. Well, I know how to do it. I just don't know what it's called. And I hovered my phone over it, and suddenly there's a YouTube video of Jake performing the poem, which is full of this kinds of interruptions, which is really, really cool. Yeah. So Max, you perform music. Erica, you have been to 1,000 readings, partly because you co-ran and founded this, wonderful organization, which is all about readings. So you know all about the interruptions that can shape a reading. Any of us who've seen Bernadette Mayer read have had this experience as well. So I just would like to invite Max and Erica, and then one more person who wants to comment on what Jake is saying. And then we'll let Jake say something briefly, and then we'll do final words. So, and it looks like Jason wanted to say something too. So Max, what's it like? And has a performance that you've done been affected by the response from the listeners?
I have never had the pleasure of performing in a place where people were as captivated and respectful as they seem to have been in the Stone. I think that
Where do you play? Bar mitzvahs and hotel lobbies?
no, well, nowhere now. And if anything, I want to commend Jake on a really lovely narration of this anecdote, which makes me long even harder for a time and place where we might be able to witness a musical performance at a club in the East Village or anywhere really. But I think what's interesting, Jake, is that Jake brings in this something that's actually completely external to the performance, right? And talking about how the musician responds to that and incorporates that. And I think in lots of performance settings, ones that are less, where the audience is less attentive, what you might get is something more like audience chatter or even potentially heckling, something that's a little bit more antagonistic. And I'm just like starting to think a little bit more about what it means to be able to incorporate that, what sort of skill set that requires. And I also just love the idea that this place called the Stone is actually extremely like permeable, that it's very much in flux. Things are coming in and out. It's a great little detail.
Thank you. Erica?
What I really love about this piece is the way that it resonates with the baraka that we began with, in that it really draws attention to the potential in the unexpected if it's just woven into the performance. So, you know, as Max was saying, like oftentimes when someone's reading and there's an interruption, there's like shushing or annoyance. But there's a certain way in which the interruptions are part of the performance. And I think that this piece really brings that forward in a nice way. And it also reminds me of a poet we'll get to in a few weeks, Joan Retallack, who talks a lot about the importance of poetics as being connected to the daily lived experience of the person making the poetry, and how everything that's around us all the time should be woven in through the poetry. And then I guess the last thing I would say is it's a really beautifully important example of chance, not so much the aleatory way of thinking about generating text via chance, but being open to the chance of interruption in performance and incorporating it.
Yeah, exactly. Frantz Fanon, in a not well enough read part of his most famous book, talked about permission. That's a word that we were talking about at the beginning here, but permission in the sense of some of his patients who were in psychiatric treatment on the basis of violence done to them by the system in colonial Algeria and Tunisia. And Fanon talked about allowing these people to narrate their own mental health as permission, widening things out to the point where what Jake is doing there maybe not so psychotherapeutic as Fanon aspired to, but the same intervention. The intervention is allowing intervention, and that's exactly the permission that Baraka was looking for freedom. Freedom is only going to work when Fanon's patients are free to have their own music, to speak their own voice. And by including those accounts in the end of that book, he did something that most of his colleagues rejected. You can't give these people a voice.